Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon on the other side. We are very happy to be able to have this IARC-ARC joint seminar. It has been a year. Oh no, it's more than a year since we had the last joint seminar, and we're really happy to have people with us today to join this talk. So for today's seminar, we will be having, we are very lucky to have two presenters that are experts on their work on the Arctic Ocean. For our first speaker, we have Professor Saitoh from Hokkaido University, and he is a professor emeritus based here at the Arctic Research Center, and he will be presenting the ongoing work of the Working Group on Integrated Ecosystem Assessment and Assessment for the Central Arctic Ocean, otherwise known as WGICA. And I'll give the floor to Saitoh Sensei for his talk. Could you please share your slides?
Yes. Can I see my slide?
Yeah, it's coming
Okay.
out okay.
But yeah,
okay.
Slide show.
I show.
Okay.
Okay. There you go.
Okay. Wait a moment.
Okay.
Good afternoon for Alaskan colleague, and good morning, Japanese colleague. Thank you for inviting me to this IARC-ARC joint seminars, and I'm very happy to have a talk today. So I'm going to introduce activities of ICES-PICES PAIM working group on the integrated ecosystem assessment for the Central Arctic Ocean, WGICA. So three organizations joined this working group. So of course you are very well each organization, but I just give a mention each organization. ICES is the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea. So this organization very old, over 100 years history, and covering Atlantic. So participant European country and Canada and US. And the PICES is a relatively young organization, the North Pacific Marine Science Organization, Pacific ICES we called. So PICES cover North Pacific, and history is only over 30 years and covering North Pacific. And PAIM is one of working group Arctic Council, protection of the Arctic marine ecosystem. So in ICES, there are many integrated ecosystem assessment groups. Square indication is each region, Barents or Norwegian and North Sea and so on. But we have two joint IEA working group. So one of joint working group is WGICA. This is ICES, PICES, PAIM, and the other one is Northern Bering Sea and Chukchi Sea, Pacific Gateways. So this is the ICES Pisces joint working group. The initiative of working WGICA in 2016. So WGICA initially one of step need to provide scientific advice on issues such as prospect future fisheries in the Arctic Ocean and the sensitivity and vulnerability of marine ecosystem in relation to human activities, including shipping, fishing, tourism, and so on. And so start is ICS and PAIN, two organizations, and then 2017, Pisces joined to WGICA. So ICS president requested to the Pisces to participate this WGICA. Then Pisces joined it as a co-sponsor of group in 2017, making the WGICA 3 organizations, ICS, Pisces, PAIN working group. And in Pisces, working group 39 was established for supporting this WGICA activity same year. And then last year terminated, and we established new expert group, study group, SG-ARC now. So now we are going on continue to the WG working group 39 activities. So first, 3 co-chair WGICA is from left to right. Hein Rune, Institute Marine Research, Norway, from PAIN, and myself from Pisces, and John Benston, Noah, USA, from ICES. So 3 co-chairs start the WGICA. And now present 3 co-chair of WGICA from ICES, Martini, Netherlands, and Liz, Norway, from PAIN, and I continue to be co-chair from Pisces. So we have every year annual meeting. So first meeting was held May 24 to 26, 2016, Copenhagen, Denmark, at ICES headquarters. So this is first one. In this time, just ICES PAIN. And second meeting was held April 19 to 21st, 2017, Seattle. So this is ICES Pisces PAIN working group. So third meeting was held in April 24, 26, 2018, St. John's, Canada. And fourth meeting was held in May 18, 10, 2019, Sapporo. So Arctic Research Center hosted this meeting, and unfortunately, under COVID-19, 5th and 6th annual meeting in virtual. And last year, 7th meeting was held in October 11 to 13, 2022, Copenhagen, Denmark, at ICES headquarters. And this year, we have planned to 8th meeting, October 22, 22, 23rd, Seattle, USA. So this is a hybrid, and also a Pisces meeting also held in Seattle. So we use same venue of Pisces. So WGICA participant, 13 nations and more than 50 members. So today's one of participant member of WGICA. And photo shows last year's hybrid meeting group photo. So our target study area is black dotted area, and including Central Arctic Ocean large marine ecosystem, the red line, and also high sea area, green line, include our target region. So as you know, annual ice cover minimum extent is decreasing dramatically. So such a climate change strongly affect Central Arctic Ocean. So such a sea ice decreasing affect human activity and also ecosystem itself. So human activity make pressure to ecosystem components. So we would like to understand this effect. And also future human activities such as high sea fishes. So next speaker will talk more detail cow fishes agreement. And so we have been thinking how to use best available data, who is interested, who is a stakeholder, and what is the information that is needed, how to deliver the science-based advice. So we have been synthesized several information on Central Arctic Ocean, and we have already published IEA report number 1. Later, I explain. So Arctic Council suggested such an ecosystem approach management for the Arctic marine environment is important issue. And then WGICA approaching integrated ecosystem approach, we need identify spatial and temporal distribution of the ecosystem, and also identify the spatial and the temporal distribution of the human activities and its pressures, and describe the sensitivity and vulnerability of the ecosystem to pressures. So we employ some scoring method and evaluate the risk of overlapping in space and time, human activities and pressure with ecosystem component. So as a first step, we have already published IEA report number 1. So we describe the ecosystem Central Arctic Ocean in space and time. And this report covering such lower trophic level to higher trophic level, including such as zooplankton and fish and demersal fish and bentos and whales and seabird and finally polar bears. So this report very comprehensive, over 300 pages. IEA first report. And now we tackle to synthesize such human activity and pressure in space and time. So this result will be published by IEA report number 2. So still ongoing. So potential framework and example area, human sector to pressure and ecosystem component. For example, science, tourism, military, and shipping affect such disturbance, pollution by catch noise, and so on. And then ecosystem component from lower trophic to higher trophic, like this. And this is one of result from the analysis and shipping traffic August 2021. So you can see some shipping traffic along the coast of Arctic and Central Arctic. So this ship activities including scientific research, tourism, and military, and so on. And light photo shows tourism ship heading to the North Pole. And we analyze such a pressure ecosystem component. So this is one example matrix, horizontal axis temperatures, so contaminant disturbance, light, litter, non-indigenous species, noise, and so on. And vertical part shows 20 ecosystem component from microbe to phytoplankton, fish, marine mammal, and seabird, and so on. So we such high, medium, low, such a categorize to scoring. And also vulnerability of the ecosystem component also similar method, matrix method and the scoring. So this just shows a scoring method. So we analyze it. So impact risk score, 3 categories: spatial extent, frequency, and degree of impact. So we merge to 3 risk score, then calculate total score. So each score such 3 levels, and also we another recover lag score, such resilience of species, such a lifetime, and resistance of pressure. How long continue such a pressure? So multiple to the score, then evaluate. So I have no time to detail scoring, but so we employ such scoring method. Finally, we analyze risk analysis. This is one of example noise, but this just the ideal. So human sectors, human activities and pressure, and then ecosystem component. So affect such whale and seabird. So still we continue to develop risk analysis. Okay, so WGICA homepage is located ISS homepage. So please visit this site if you wish to get more information and the report. So as I mentioned, WGICA IEA report number 1 is published last year. So Hein Lune edited this report, very comprehensive, over 300 pages, and ecosystem assessment of the Central Arctic Ocean, description of the ecosystem. So one of today's participants, Nishino-san, contributed greatly this report. And also we have already published ecosystem overview, including such a description pressure and several overview description. So also you can find this report, ecosystem overview in ICES homepage. So recently, ICES make a YouTube channel, movie, very short, three minutes short. Name is Deep, Dive Deep. So you can find from this site. Please enjoy this short movie on Central Arctic Ocean. So Hein Rune mainly talking some part. Okay, so finally, I just show some relationship between ICES, PICES, and international national activities. So in ICES, as I mentioned, we have two IEA working group, WGICA and WGIEA North Bering Sea Chakchi Seas. So this joint working group is still continue. So WGICA will continue to 2025 and so on. Maybe WGIEA NBSCS also continue to after 2023. And in PICES, we have two working group, working group 39 and working group 44. Working group 39 synchronized to WGICA and working group 44 is synchronized to WGIEA NBSCS. Then, so W39 terminated last year. Then we established study group Arctic Ocean and Pacific Gateways. So now this group writing the proposal, new adversarial panel of the Arctic issues. And then our activity is very strongly to international national initiatives. So of course, Arctic Council has many working groups. So PAM is very strong relation to this WGICA. And also IARC, there are many projects and observation program such as DBO, and also synthetic Arctic survey is going on, and also ESA's also ecosystem study of Arctic subarctic ecosystems, and also next speaker will talk fisheries agreement. Cow FA is also an important issue for Central Arctic Ocean. So I would like to summarize today's talk. So WGICA is engaging scientists in the transdisciplinary multinational 13 nations collaboration across the international institution, ICES, PICES, and PAIN. WGICA published a comprehensive IEA report number 1, covering description of the cow ecosystem and cow ecosystem overview. We have these two publications, and now we are going on writing IEA report number 2. So WGICA links human activities, pressures, and ecosystem vulnerability into the same quantitative risk analysis by assessing the spatial and temporal overlap using best available data. And finally, I just introduce ACE, WGICA annual meeting will be held in Seattle, October 20 to 23rd. So PICES kindly provide meeting room, same venue, PICES 2023. So from October 20 to 23rd, we have a hybrid and online meeting in the PICES. Please participate if you have interested WGICA activities. So thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Saitoh Sensei, for this comprehensive overview of the work that has been done under the WGICA, the ongoing working group for synthesizing the work in the Arctic. And I just would like to open the floor now for questions. Is there any question from the floor? You can just raise your hand, and if you have. And I see Hayo raising his hand.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Seiichi. That was very interesting. I have a question. You showed a slide where you were looking at the different organism groups impacted by these pressures that you had identified in the Central Arctic Ocean. And you showed bowhead whales, but I didn't see beluga whales called out. So my question is, in that context, from what I understand, beluga migrate from Alaska coastal waters all the way up into the high Arctic. Are you accounting for pressures that maybe apply to such migratory species such as beluga in the Central Arctic Ocean that then have impacts on indigenous communities and coastal communities at lower latitudes? Is that part of your look at these spatial temporal overlaps?
Yes, IEA report number 2, we are including beluga, not only bonehead whales. So we include beluga next report, but not considering such indigenous people activities. So just from the viewpoint of natural science, but after getting such a risk map, so we would like to show such indigenous people to evaluate such a risk risk map. We think.
Thank you. Yeah, that will be very important. I think that because of the connections to important species, that would be an important connection to make. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, since we are a little bit tight for time, I'll just move on to our next speaker, and as soon as she finishes, we can also take in some other questions after all the talks. Would that be all right?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Saitoh Sensei, for that wonderful talk. So our second speaker is Dr. Betsy Baker from the an IARC affiliate faculty, and also a global fellow, a fellow of the Wilson Center Polar Institute. And she will be giving us her talk on addressing the relevance for marine ecosystems and marine scientific activity of the 2018 Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement. And with that, I will give the floor to Dr. Baker, please.
Yes, thank you. And good morning to colleagues in Japan, and good afternoon to colleagues here in Alaska. And thank you, Saitoh-san, for the really helpful groundwork for my talk and the update on the WGICA's important work. So two recent international agreements involving the high seas deserve our attention today. Both could increasingly impact and engage with Arctic marine science and draw meaningfully on Indigenous knowledge. The big news is that today in New York, the negotiating parties adopted the High Seas Agreement on Biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. So that's been about 20 years in the making and very exciting that it's been adopted. So that's the first agreement. And the other is, as mentioned, the 2018 CAO, Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement. The BBNJ agreement is global and the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement is regional, but both call on states to work collectively to protect those areas beyond national jurisdiction, where absent regulation, all states may exercise high seas freedoms, and no one state is responsible for what happens. The BBNJ agreement explicitly excludes most fishing activity from its requirements, while the CAO agreement deals specifically with fish. Even if their overlaps are not significant, both have practical implications for future scientific efforts, and that's what I'll focus on today. And I chose this photo from the Mosaic expedition to emphasize what we all know, that to conduct marine scientific research in areas beyond national jurisdiction in the Arctic takes years of planning, extensive financial resources, international coordination, and dedicated scientists, each with years of specialized training and discipline. For those of you who don't know, it was a multinational, multi-year initiative. The research vessel Polarstern is frozen into moored to, the ice floe in the back of the picture in an effort to drift as Nansen did 125 years ago with the currents. And the Russian research vessel Granitsin is resupplying it and moored to the same ice floe 970 meters away in the middle of the Central Arctic Ocean. And it's a great reminder of all that we can accomplish, even when a pandemic interferes, and all that has been lost as well, we're reminded of, at least temporarily, with the war and the suspension of scientific cooperation with our Russian colleagues. Next slide, please. So areas beyond national jurisdiction is what we're talking about today, and they constitute about 2/3 of the world's ocean. By volume, not surface area, those areas beyond national jurisdiction represent 95% of the world's total habitat. Yet by some counts, we've identified only 9% of marine species in those vast areas. The light blue areas are the exclusive economic zones, EEZs, of coastal states. And as you know, these give coastal state jurisdiction within 200 nautical miles to regulate uses there, including fishing and exploitation of natural resources such as oil and gas. But beyond national jurisdiction, so out in the dark blue areas, those activities are largely unregulated because of high seas freedoms: freedom to fish, freedom of scientific research, navigation, overflight, etc. Any state, landlocked or otherwise, may exercise those rights beyond national jurisdiction, but it must be done with due regard for the rights of all states. These are all provisions spelled out in the Law of the Sea Convention and observed by states, whether or not they're party to the UNCLOS. We'll look at the basics of the two agreements before turning to their possible interactions and what they might mean for science. So thank you for that. The BBNJ agreement was designed, as I said, to regulate use of biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. And we see roughly the 60% of the global oceans that are beyond and the 40% that are within. You'll notice in the title of the agreement that it is under the United Nations Conventions on the Law of the Sea. So this will be the third implementing agreement under the convention. The first was on deep seabed mining, and the second was on straddling fish stocks. This one will likely not enter into force for months or even years, since 60 states need to ratify it in their national systems before that happens. But it should be on our radar screens now for the principles and institutions it will establish and their potential to impact marine science and Indigenous knowledge. You can see areas beyond national jurisdiction up at the top, I've put in writing because you can't see them on this map, if you will. And those are the areas that are, if you can click, there we go, the seabed and ocean floor. And if you can go back one more, thank you. Then these are activities in areas beyond national jurisdiction that are governed by the International Seabed Authority, and that is set up under the Law of the Sea Convention as well. But a significant reason why the BBNJ agreement was needed is that the International Seabed Authority rules cover only non-living mineral resources in areas beyond national jurisdiction, and those are considered the common heritage of mankind. But by contrast, living resources, including marine genetic resources, have not been treated as common heritage under international law, and that's what the BBNJ agreement seeks to change. Next slide, please. Another change it seeks to overcome is the stovepiping and sectoral approach of many existing agreements involving the high seas. They tend to deal with one topic, usually fisheries or shipping or mining, and the slide in the previous presentation on human activities and pressures gave us a sense of all of the different uses of the ocean, but they're all regulated separately. And they don't consider interactions of cumulative effects of those activities, which clearly the WGICA is looking to do at some level. So that's a problem. These are mostly fisheries organizations that you see. And the next slide shows very clearly that there's not a single international governance body that can enact comprehensive conservation measures across multiple sectors on the high seas. Next slide. So turning to finally to the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement, you can see the dark blue area is the one defined in the agreement, and it is entirely surrounded by the EEZs of Canada, Russia, Norway, Greenland, and the United States. In those EEZs, those states exercise fisheries jurisdiction, and that's built into the definition of the area in the treaty. They and the 5 other parties, China, Iceland, Japan, South Korea, and the EU, have significant interests in how fisheries will develop in the area, if at all. As Ambassador David Bolton has observed, the CAO Fisheries Agreement reflects an unprecedented vision among international fisheries agreements to prevent the start of commercial fishing in a large high seas area due to the lack of adequate data with which to manage such a fishery. And for reasons of distance and ice, there have been no commercial fisheries in the region, and they don't anticipate them starting anytime soon, to, I guess, state the obvious. It entered into force in 2021, and just last week was the second meeting of the Conference of the Parties. And I should note that John Bengtson, who was mentioned as one of the early WGICA co-chairs, is now chairing the science body that is established under the Central Arctic Ocean Agreement. So showing the absolute need for that kind of continued expertise from the science community. Next slide, please. I want to take a minute, that marine scientists from Hokkaido, including Irene, and from UAF have been actively involved in scientific discussions relating to the Central Arctic Ocean, and also in significant research on marine biodiversity. And Saitoh-san's presentation today made clear just how important the work of WGICA is to the CAO fishing agreement. Earlier this month, the journal Nature chose Dr. Alavia's paper on Pan-Arctic marine biodiversity and species co-occurrence as one of its editor's choice for World's Ocean Day on June 6th. And like her, 2 of her co-authors are also from Hokkaido, Jorge Garcia Molinos and Takafumi Hirata, and one, Franz Mutter, is from UAF. This is just one example of hundreds of the way scientists at both institutions are engaging on these issues. So if any of you are, besides Irene, are also on the Zoom today, I would love to hear from you during the discussion. Next slide, please. Turning to the basics of each agreement, I'll start with what they have in common, which lays the groundwork for cooperation when the BBNJ eventually enters into force. Both embrace the need for precaution and ecosystem understanding and the use of science and indigenous knowledge in supporting that understanding. Next slide, please. The objectives that are stated in each agreement are also compatible. Under the BBNJ, the overarching objective is the first one you see there, to conserve and sustainably use marine biological diversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And you see the same language in the last bullet point under the Central Arctic Ocean, the conservation and sustainable use of fish stocks in that case. The other under the BBNJ are sharing benefits of marine genetic resources, which we'll turn to in a moment. There are many provisions about strengthening global and regional cooperation and across sectors. And we've seen already the need for sectors, mining, shipping, fishing, to all have some say in what's going on. And precaution again, and you see precaution stated very clearly in the Central Arctic Ocean. They have just one objective there, and that, as we've seen, is to prevent unregulated fishing through that type of management. And again, the focus on ecosystems to be stated in the objective is important. Next slide, please. So the BBNJ does not apply to regulated fisheries, as I've already said, and it has 4 main sections, and I'll really, because of time, only focus on the first, which is marine genetic resources and benefit sharing. But it is important to mention the second part deals with area-based management tools, marine protected areas, things like that. And once those are agreed by all of the parties, those will be a major tool for protecting biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. The sections on environmental impact assessment and capacity building and tech transfer will have to wait for another day for reasons of time. Could you click again and we'll get a definition up there, please, of marine genetic resources. So benefit sharing is important to address marine genetic resources in areas beyond national jurisdiction as part of the global commons, which until this agreement, they haven't had that designation. They can and are being monetized, but not all states are benefiting. For example, the pharmaceuticals giant BASF owns 47% of all patented sea life genes to date. And most of those are actually likely, I don't know for sure, but I believe that most of those are coming from right now areas within national jurisdiction, but as our ability to explore and sample deeper, that will change. And I should also just mention the existence of the 2 treaty bodies. I saw the question from Nicholas, that's BASF. Is the name of the company. But the 2 treaty bodies, we don't really know much about other than that they will be created under the agreement, a scientific and technical body. I will talk a bit more about the clearinghouse mechanism. And I chose this picture of the Riftia tube worms in the Galapagos because a few months ago, you may have seen stories about Chinese fishing fleets nipping at the edges of the Galapagos protected areas, surrounded by high seas, just to show the interaction between areas within and areas beyond the national jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So again, the goal of the CAO fisheries agreement, no commercial fishing until a new management entity is in place. That is not for the parties to the CAO agreement to set up that new entity, but they must base their decision on whether to start negotiating for that new management entity on the best available science and indigenous knowledge. They will get that information through the Joint Program of Scientific Research and Monitoring, which has 2 aims. And again, we see the very strong ecosystem focus. This is not an old fisheries agreement that focuses only on the stocks themselves. And the need to determine if those sustainably harvested fish stocks might exist now or later. Those are the 2 aims. And they draw on many sources. That one of the last slides in the previous presentation showed all of the different scientific initiatives. And one of the challenges of the joint program is how to draw on those. And they are doing so successfully, but it is a very carefully, it takes a lot of planning and coordination to do that. And I think also worth pointing out under point 2 here, under the joint program, that's another indication of the precautionary approach and ecosystem considerations that the parties are to consider. What's the impact of fishing on the ecosystems? This is not something that has shown up in older model fisheries agreements. So it's an important statement of that new approach. And I will say, this is fishing at the Central Arctic Ocean, I think 2 years ago. It's going to be a while before there's any commercial. They evidently did find some farmed Arctic cod there in the Central Arctic Ocean that had migrated on currents. And I don't know a lot more about that, but it's pretty cool fishing setup. Next slide. Okay, so that's a lot of background to get to what I really wanted to talk about, the important potential implication of the BBNJ agreement for marine science in the Arctic. And that's how it affects the freedom of marine scientific research in areas beyond national jurisdiction. These pictures from Rogers et al. Are a good reminder that while all states have the right to do marine research in areas beyond national jurisdiction, very few have the capacity. It requires state-of-the-art scientific research vessels, modern sampling tools, including for deep sea research, and trained personnel in many disciplines. So the BBNJ does not set up a permitting or a consent requirement because there are no states in areas beyond national jurisdiction to consent. As many of you know, to conduct a research cruise in the exclusive economic zone or on the shelf of another state, the state must be given, their consent must be given. And there are detailed processes for doing that. Those stem from the Law of the Sea Convention and vary from state to state, but 6 months notice is typical, advance notice. But beyond national jurisdiction, consent is not required because all states have the freedom of marine scientific research. But the BBNJ agreement introduces a notification requirement and a clearinghouse mechanism to deal with tracking what research is going on relating to marine genetic resources. And it's important to emphasize that the language in the BBNJ agreement emphasizes freedom of marine scientific research. And indeed, you can see in the Article 9 there that the freedom of marine scientific research itself is key to achieving one of the main objectives of the marine genetic resources section, and that is generating knowledge. So let's just take a look at, and I will try to wrap up quickly here, the clearinghouse mechanism on the next slide, please. So this is an unofficial graphic put together by a Harvard laboratory that deals with biogeochemistry and engineering. And it helps us look at how the process might work. Notification, not consent, is required for 3 different phases. And notification is made to something called the clearinghouse mechanism, which is established by the convention. Those 3 blue boxes on the right-hand side are the 3 things that researchers need to notify to the clearinghouse mechanism. Pre-collection, and that will be very similar to the forms used for, or to the processes used for notifying cruise plans. Post-collection, that information also has to be notified to the clearinghouse mechanism. And utilization. If you could click again, please. It's important to note that utilization is a technical term. It's defined in the agreement, and it's focused on activity that involves biotech. So it's really further research and development on samples. And if you can click one more time, there should be the definition of biotechnology, which is basically relating to modifying products or processes for a specific use using technological applications. So I think that they've gone out of their way to make clear that this is not going to apply to the typical marine scientific research collecting of samples. We don't know whether that will be challenged. We don't know exactly what the form is going to look like, but I raise it as just an issue to be aware of. But I also say, even though the details are yet to be worked out, the fact that this clearinghouse mechanism exists may provide an opportunity for the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Science Coordinating Group, which is already up and running, to help contribute to how the clearinghouse mechanism requirements could support or complement scientific activity under the Central Arctic Ocean Agreement. Next slide, please. And these are my last two. So principles are a way of helping us review compatibilities between the two agreements. And every international agreement sets out first the objectives and then the principles that are to guide the parties. And we've already talked about almost all of these. I would just emphasize the third point under the BBNJ, and this gets to something in Saitoh-san's presentation, an approach, not just an ecosystem approach, but an approach that builds ecosystem resilience and maintains and restores ecosystem integrity. And there's even more discussion of what that means in the agreement, but we're looking at a very comprehensive, not just relationships between different ecosystems, but the resilience and the integrity of them. I haven't said much about Indigenous knowledge today, and I'm happy to do so in the discussion, but both agreements have several provisions talking about how that will be used side by side with scientific knowledge. And that is groundbreaking and a welcome change in international agreements. The last slide is, nope, sorry, two more, but they're quite closely related. Ambassador Bolton has pointed out the basic purposes of both of these agreements are consistent. If I were talking to a mostly international law audience, I could go down into a lot of detail on sort of the thorny legal questions that might be raised. But I would say that because the BBNG does not apply to regulated fishing, there'll probably be minimal overlap, but still a lot of opportunities for cooperation. The BBNJ parties have to interpret that agreement so that it doesn't undermine other agreements like the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement. And in fact, there are requirements to promote coherence in the overall system that those agreements form. And the science and technical body is also to draw on appropriate advice from those groups like the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement. I'll talk about timing in the questions if there are any, but the simple fact that the CAO agreement is up and running gives it an advantage in, if you go to the next slide, please, possibly even being able to contribute its science to the activities of the BBNJ science group. For example, if the BBNJ leads to a marine protected area in the Central Arctic Ocean 10 years down the road, the CAO agreement could contribute to the underlying science that would help make for a robust marine protected area. And the parties to the Central Arctic Ocean Agreement would likely play a role, the key role, in monitoring observance of that protected area. The clearinghouse mechanism may assist integration and coordination of marine science globally and also in the Arctic. So maybe in the discussion, we can talk about my last question there. How can the science coordinating group serve as models for some aspect of what happens in the BBNJ? My next slide shows that if these will be posted, I'm assuming I've listed the sources, and I would like to thank Sam Lebo, who's joined us today, senior at the Georgetown School of Foreign Service, who helped with some of the research. So thank you. And the last slide is my contact information.
Thank you, Dr. Baker, for a very nice presentation, giving us an introduction on the agreements and policies that are currently in place and possibly and hopefully be enforced, the BBNJ. Am I getting it right?
Lots of acronyms.
So thank you again for that wonderful talk. I will now open the floor for questions and or some questions and also comments on the talks that we have heard, both from Dr. Baker and also from Dr. Saitoh. Okay, Marina, you're raising your hand over there. You can just go ahead, please.
If there are other questions, I will wait. Hello, Betsy. I'm very grateful to you for an illuminating talk. And you mentioned as the second pillar of the BBNJ agreement. Can you please go back to that slide? You spoke today, as you announced, mostly about marine scientific research, but yeah, please, no, one slide.
The next one, he said.
The next one, right? Area-based management tools, MPs, and others. I understand because of the time constraints, you can't concentrate on this issue, but can you just say a few words, because it would really, I think it is a very important tool, and traditionally in some MPs, extensive marine scientific research has been done, sufficient or not. So they are also, they're not just areas, protected areas, they're also intensive research areas, I suppose. And that's why they were designated for protection. So can you please give a few, I don't know, highlight?
Well, I will say that it was made. I mean, the negotiations went on for years, and that they reached agreement on. And we should refer to area-based management tools, because they aren't just marine protected areas, as you said. And indeed, the discussion has been very clear that the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement itself is an area-based management tool, right? It's not establishing an MPA, but it has established an area where, until further information is available, no commercial fishing will be allowed, right? So there's some interesting questions about, I think with the timing, it's that not so much a concern, but whether there might be some conflicts between the Central Arctic Ocean Fishery Agreement as an area-based management tool and the provisions of, or the processes for establishing one under the BBNJ. What that section does is set up very detailed steps for how they should be proposed, these area-based management tools, who has priority, if you will, or has a slightly different status. The coastal states will have, I will not say priority, but they are to be sure to be involved in reviewing the proposals. And so that was another potential conflict between the Central Arctic Ocean Fishery Agreement and the BBNJ is, what if those 10 parties to the Central Arctic Ocean Fishing Agreement aren't interested in MPA, right? What sort of conflicts does that set up? And indeed, there's a lot of speculation about which parties to the fisheries agreement will not be signing on to the BBNJ agreement, but I won't go into that because it's speculation. I hope that's somewhat responsive to your question.
Thank you so much. So if I understand correctly, it differs fundamentally from the traditional piecemeal MPA setting approach, because there are the number of MPAs, for instance, around Japan was never enough to, how should I say, was never sufficient for a consistent area-based management. They were just too scarce, and their management was piecemeal.
I think how it differs is that these would be decided by the full international community that is party to the agreement.
Okay, not by national agencies.
Correct.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay. Are there any more questions from the floor? I'll just extend a little bit because we started out late, and it's a very interesting discussion we're having here. Okay, Hayo, you can just go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks to both of you, Betsy and Seiichi. I just wanted to highlight the fact that these types of conversations between legal scholars, environmental scientists, or marine researchers and others are really quite rare. You know, it's a great opportunity to have this conversation. What's missing is having indigenous voice in here because of some of those unique aspects of the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement that have participation through Inuit Circumpolar Council by indigenous peoples of the Arctic. And so I just wanted to loop back on something you mentioned, Seiichi, right? That is that the joint Pisces-ICES meeting is taking place in the second half of October in Seattle. Igor Polyakov and I were just talking about that because, and Igor can say more to that. I know he and Laura Whitmore, who's on as well, have a project with COPRI in Korea, where they're looking to enhance collaboration in the Arctic. And there's been some conversation about maybe using that workshop in Seattle as a way for some of the people who are interested in these types of questions to connect either before or after that meeting. You know, the Pisces workshop is over the weekend. I was at the Alaska Fisheries Science Center last week and at Pacific Marine Environmental Lab, and there's a number of researchers at NOAA, you know, including John Bankston, who wasn't there, of course, he was in Korea, who are quite interested in being part of these conversations as well. So I just want to encourage all of us as a group, because of these great connections that we have between Hokkaido University, University of Alaska Fairbanks, and IARC and the Arctic Research Center at Hokkaido in particular, to continue this and maybe think about whether we would want to have some kind of get-together for those who are attending that meeting in Seattle, either before or after. I'll probably do all I can to attend, and I know there's a few others who are going to try and be there in person as well. But thanks again for such a great set of presentations.
Okay, so thanks, Hayo, for raising that thought during the discussion. And again, we thank Dr. Baker and Dr. Saitoh for those enlightening talks. And thank you all for joining us today. And indeed, we were really happy to see that despite the fact that it's holiday in Alaska, in the US, we still have people coming in to join the seminar. And that would be for today's seminar. Again, thank you all for coming, and thank you both for our wonderful speakers today. And we'll be seeing you again for the next couple of seminars that we are planning, hopefully in August Do you have any announcement, Wagakun, or there's nothing? So thank you all again, and have a good night and have a good morning. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.